Hakim Sameer Hamdani is an architectural historian and conservation expert based in Srinagar, Kashmir. He is also the design director for the Kashmir chapter of INTAC, the Indian National Trust for Art and Cultural Heritage. He has overseen numerous conservation and restoration efforts in Kashmir, such as the reconstruction of the Pir Dastgir Sahib Shrine and the conservation of Ali Masjid and Thag Baba Sahib. He has also worked on historic Mughal gardens, and two of his conservation projects were longlisted for the Aga Khan Award for Architecture. His published books include Shiism in Kashmir, a history of Sunni-Shia rivalry and reconciliation, The Syncretic Traditions of Islamic Religious Architecture of Kashmir, and City of Kashmir, Srinagar, a Popular History. From September 17 to 28, 2025, he's hosting an exhibition at the India International Centre Art Gallery that studies and interprets inscriptions on 14th to 19th century Kashmiri architecture. Called Naqsh, the Imprint, it showcases the surviving heritage of architectural epigraphy in Kashmir and traces their evolution from the Sultanate period to later Afghan and Sikh rule. Featuring inscriptions in Persian, Arabic, and rare Sanskrit, it highlights the region's rich calligraphic traditions, their cultural significance, and their role in shaping a distinct Persianate landscape. Drawn from a detailed documentation project, the display preserves what remains of this unique fusion of art, language, and architecture. The detailed documentation, study, and translation of architectural epigraphic material in Kashmir was undertaken by Sameer Hamdani, Mehran Qureshi, Tabish Haider Qazi, Umar Farooq, Zoya Mehraj Khan, and Taha Mughal.
So the exhibition is sort of named Naqsh, and this was a name that was suggested by one of my friends and a team member, Mehran. It's basically, it's meant that you have a naqsh on the sand, you have a naqsh on the wall, but then these are, in a sense, textual imprints that have been sort of there on buildings throughout centuries. And so we thought it was an idea. So the project was primarily about documenting the written text that you find in buildings. That's what art epigraphy is all about, the text. It can be in a book, it can be on a coin, it can be on a tombstone, but here we are concerned about the text and the messaging and the sort of the aesthetics concerned with it, which you find on an architectural structure. And we here have some of the most understudied models that are there in India, wherein the buildings that we praise are from 14th century up to 19th century. This is one of the earliest Muslim religious buildings that is still extant in Kashmir. It's like many other such structures, it's a shrine, it's a mosque, and at a certain period there was also a larger cemetery with the structure. But now the importance of the epigraphs here lies in the fact that, one, it acts as a correction to the textual history. So generally the building is sort of said to have been constructed by Zainul Abidin, but once you go to the building and you see the stones, it clearly mentions that the Sayyid, who was from Medina, which is in Saudi Arabia, was the one who was responsible for the construction of this mosque. So he clearly mentions that his name, Fatih Muhammad Madni, and then he gets a rather interesting, you could say almost a footnote, wherein he says, Sakne Kashmir, President of Kashmir. So this is sort of the way sort of associated with the land as Kashmir came into touch with the wider Persianate culture and Islam in the 14th and 15th century. Then there is this sort of addition which happened to the site. This is a Mughal addition. Now most of it is gone. This is an archival image that we placed out. But what's interesting is again corrects our textual and art history about this building, because this was assumed to be sort of constructed and contemporary to the building itself, the main building, which is in 1444. But out here you could clearly see that it mentions that the addition happened during the reign of Shah Jahan. So the tile work is also from Shah Jahan's period. So it's a Mughal tile work, which now is missing on the site, and initially it had the symbol of Sagittarius on either side of the door, so it's gone. But again, there are sort of interesting aspects which help in locating the building, which help in locating the milieu in which this building was built, and you get it all from the epigraphs which are there, and they just need to be read.
So, but why Sagittarius?
Now, there could be one reason, and we have no evidence of it. So, Something similar also happens in Isfahan, wherein you have Sagittarius on the main gateway to the bazaar of Isfahan. There it is because it sort of coincides with the date of the construction of the bazaar. Was there something similar happening here? I would argue for it, but we have no textual proof of it. I mean, you could have any zodiac sign on the gateway, but you're consciously chosen a sign, which is that of Sagittarius. There should be a certain underlying meaning behind it. It can't be just a sort of a kardiya, we just did it. So I would assume, and again I'm saying there's no textual evidence to sort of support it, but I would assume somehow either the construction or the completion of this construction would have coincided with the sign of the Sagittarius. In the month of the Sagittarius, it would have been completed.
So I'm just going back from Jaipur, where you have the Jantar Mantar, which has all the zodiac signs. Now, this was built, say, Muhammad Shah Rangila's time, much later in time. But right from Humayun's time, we have this emphasis on astrology.
I mean, that's
the whole
book on Humayun which says
yes,
something like
the planetary king.
I mean, his obsession with it. I mean, it might have even costed him his throne. At least that's a popular version of history, that he was not very concerned about when he would step in. But then these things happen throughout Mughal history. I mean, if you know, when Aurangzeb was crowned as a king and he seemed one of these pyramidical kings in the Mughal dynasty, he actually waited for the exact hour and the minute which his astrologers had suggested. Then he came out and sat on the throne and was enthroned as the emperor of Hindustan. So I would say this was something that was a part of the culture, both the popular culture as well as the court culture. So you are sort of working with it, and somewhere you find references to it. This is something that is rather unique to Kashmir, and this is what we call Hankal. So in Kashmir, whenever you cross the threshold into any sort of a khanka, any shrine or any tomb or mausoleum of a saint, the first thing you see is that hanging on the door, on the entrance to the main shrine, you have these what we call in Kashmiri Hankal, which could be roughly translated into chain. So you have a chain across the doorway, and in between you have this medallion which could be of copper. Mostly these are copper. It could be also brass, somewhere else like here. We have something which is in metal and mica, basically what we call abr. So you don't have glass, so what you used for to sort of denote glass was mica. So it's there, and then most of these medallions are also engraved, and that's where our interest comes in, because of the writing. And the writing again appeals to your sense of piety and devotion. So like you have here, the O loud of the repentant, accept our repentance. So repeatedly you come across these messaging which speak about the fact that one, the saint who's buried inside the shrine is going to act as our guide for both the worlds, here and hereafter. So this almost establishes that personal human relation between the space and the devotee who's visiting there. So where did this tradition come from? I mean, again, in Quran we have a verse which speaks about holding firmly to the chain of God. So the contemporary understanding is that probably it's borrowed from that verse, but then you would find that across the various Muslim cultures, you don't find a similar thing happening in any shrine. So you see in Delhi, you go down in Deccan or you go outside South Asia, you won't find something similar happening. So there is a possibility, and again this is just a possibility, it's not established, that in Kashmir, as across in many other parts of South Asia, the tendency was that once you enter a temple, you cross the threshold from this profane into the sacred. One of the first acts is ringing the bell, and because in Islam, bell or ringing of the bell is forbidden, so you have a sort of a similar act. You're mimicking the act, but the symbol is changed, or the sort of the material manifestation of what you're touching is changed. So here you have just a medallion which is inscribed with the name of the god, a verse which would be poetry, which would be sort of a devotional verse from Quran, but the act almost mimics that what you do in a temple, and I would say in certain cases even in the Buddhist temple. So this is an archival image wherein you see, here you have the main entrance gateway, and here you have this Hankal medallion, the sort of the importance it had and continues to have in Kashmir even today. This is rather interesting because this is the only sort of epigraph we found which was sort of inscribed on mud plaster. So the background is basically mud, and then on mud they have done this, which is known as the verse of the throne or the throne verse of Quran. So the entire structure has been rebuilt, and only this one small segment, which is around 1 feet by 2 feet, is saved. So it's interesting that we have these traces of past still preserved and sometimes even hidden. This happens to be one of the most prominent and monumental wooden shrines that we have in Kashmir. It's known as Khanbai Shahan. So in terms of its massing, it sort of dominates the entire riverfront. Initially constructed somewhere in the 14th century, then rebuilt in the 18th century, but mostly the interior work, and that's what we are seeing here, was done in 18th and 19th century. In fact, some of the repair work on the inner shrine was done by Santosh, Ram Rasool Santosh, who was one of his contemporary greatest poet. I think he was a Padma Shri, he was awarded with the Padma Shri, and his work actually on the Chakreshwari temple and symbol of Tantra there is really profound. So here he starts his work initially working as an apprentice and doing the paint work, the color work here and there, and then he's...
And this is all replaced by paper mache?
This is what we technically call paper mache, but technically it's not paper mache, it's mostly paint work on wood, but in certain cases you also have a layer of paper, so it's not mass paper. So basically what's happening, paper mache is a word which we borrow from the French. So somewhere in the 18th century, you have this huge amount of Kashmiri shawls going to the court of the Napoleon's court and the European market. And some of the French agents who are buying it, they find that these shawls are packed in paper mache boxes, painted, and then they start selling these boxes as separate items. So they come back to Kashmir and then they make certain changes in terms of their specification, color, etc. So they call it paper mache, and then it becomes a part in our language also. But traditionally we just call it naqashi or kari-munaqash, which is the art of doing naqashi. So it can be on any surface. It doesn't have to be paper mache, but because of this sort of French connection, it was mostly into boxes, utilitarian as well as decorative, which were molded of molded marble.
And do we know that the original mosque, how colorful was that?
We have no idea about the origin. We only know that the original structure was rather a series of smaller buildings. Then when the fire happened in 1730, if I'm correct, if I remember my date correctly, they sort of consolidated all of it into a large, massive structure, which happens to be the largest wooden monument of Kashmir. Again, because we talked about shawls, so you have these almost many chambers on the side, which are basically used for as khalwat khanas, or wherein they go for solitary meditation, chilla. And every door is basically decorated with a motif, like here. And all these motifs are representative of a pattern in the shawl, Kashmiri shawl. So every door has a pattern from a shawl. This is what we call bootin.
And somewhere here I read mention that this is Mir Muhammad Hamdani, which is also your name.
So, my ancestor arrived in Kashmir with Mir Muhammad Hamdani, and incidentally, he was also the first, what we call the Mutwali, which is the custodian of the shrine, of this Khan. So, that's just a coincidence.
But Hamdan is a city in Iran.
It's a city in Iran.
So, all these people came from Iran to India during Timur Lane's time?
Somewhere during that period. So, initially it happens in around 1380s, then 1390s, but then you see there is a regular coming of people from Iran to Kashmir from 14th century up to almost 18th, 17th centuries, and they are associated with different orders. So Mir Muhammad Hamdani or his father, whom we call Shah Hamdan, they belong to the Qutbiyya order, but then there are the Naqshbandis, there are the Sohrabandis, other order. People came who were associated with different orders, so they came to Kashmir at different times. And then we also had a great number of Persian poets who arrived in Kashmir during 17th century, primarily during the reign of Shah Jahan. So this is interesting because these are basically epigraphs that you have for two of the temples that were constructed in Kashmir immediately after Kashmir was conquered by Lahore Darbar under Maharaja Ranjit Singh. So the first two structures that came up in Kashmir were both temples, and this is rather interesting. It follows the same sort of the language. It's in Persian, though it's now for a temple, and it also follows the same aesthetics in terms of the writing. Both are in Mustalik. And then again, even the sort of the literary quality of it is almost something similar, mirrors what was happening there, and which is indicative of the fact that to a large extent the court of Punjab in a way sets itself as a successor to the Mughals. They imitate, they mimic many of the mannerisms and the customs and the cultural practices that were there under the Mughals. So, though it's the Sarkar-e-Khalsa, but then it's located in a milieu which seems to sort of inscribe all its cultural values from the Mughal Empire and what was prevalent in Punjab at that point.
And
one of the Shah inscriptions again from Muslim rule in Kashmir that was actually deciphered by Dr. B.L. Cole. So the sort of the text, the translation of the text is directly what we've taken from Dr. Cole's book, and it's located at Khunmo. So the stone is still there, but we thought that if we do a drawing of it, it's far more readable as compared to the stone which is halfly eroded. But then this is a stone which commemorates some of the Muslim rulers of the earlier Sultanate period. It's about a hermitage, a Hindu vihara that was established there. The stone is basically coming from the community. It's not a part of the royalty, it's not a patronage, it's not coming from the king, it's coming from the community itself. So it shows that sort of syncretic culture that I would argue lies at the core of Kashmir's culture.
but there was something very interesting. Somebody pointed out to me yesterday in this that you've got the names of Mughal rulers, but
these are Sultanate period rulers, so these are all sort of Sanskrit knights. So for Zainul Abidin, it is Jainalabadina Shah. So it is a very Sanskrit version of Persianate name, but then that happens also in the histories of that period. Someone did point out that fact that this is a dedicatory stone which is located in the Hindu faith, but it always also invokes certain symbolisms that are associated with Buddhism. So that's rather interesting in the stone of this version. These are again certain stones that are from the 17th century, 18th century, located all across Kashmir. In this case, again, as I said, some of these epigraphs do help us in correcting the textual history. So we have an understanding of history that comes directly to text, and then we see material evidences of a building that's constructed. This was said to be having constructed mosque during the reign of Shah Jahan, but after it clearly mentions the name of Jahangir. So again, it helps us on these doing the chronology of certain buildings and the patronage involved. So here is a building that was generally in all Persian texts said to have been constructed by Shah Jahan, but in fact it happened to be something that came up during his father's time. So that's what's interesting about material culture, that in many ways it sort of corrects our notions of history based on just the text, the written history. These are again some of the oldest. One of them is an older stone for island pleasure garden that was established by one of Kashmir's most famous sultans, Zainul Abidin and Saimullah. And this incidentally happens to be a stone for epigraph for a well, a public well that came up during the reign of Aurangzeb. So again, in terms of the patronage, it shows many of the buildings are primarily religious. That's why these epigraphs have been preserved so far, because there's a certain amount of care that goes into these buildings. But then there are also community buildings, community works like bridges, like public wells, etc., which were constructed and whose I would say we can only know about them from these stones, that there were these public utilitarian or infrastructural works that came up at a certain point. We are still not able to locate the well, where was it, We have no idea, but we know it was there. It was constructed at a certain time by a certain king and a certain person. So it's interesting. Somewhere you also find mentions of name also. These are two rather interesting stones, and we are taking them on the rest of the larger grid. So the lower one happens to be from Nagarnagar, which is the imperial Mughal city which was established by Akbar. So after the Mughals conquered Kashmir, the army came in, but then they found that they had to quarter the troops, the citizens, and was creating a certain amount of discontent between the people and the Mughal nobility as well as the soldiers. So in the end, it was decided that you construct a separate city. So there is Srinagar, which is the living city during the Mughal period, where the Kashmiris are living, and then there is this enclosed within the wall city where the Mughal royalty and the emperor and all his troops are located. So this is an epigraph for it. Interestingly, again, the calligraphy for the stone was done by a person by the name of Muhammad Murad, Shireen Kalam. So there are a couple of Kashmiri calligraphers, Muhammad Hussain, Zareen Kalam, Muhammad Murad, Muhammad Baqir, who rose to a position of prominence at the Mughal court. So one is again talks about the fact that how open the court was in terms of its patronage. You just needed to excel in a certain work, in a certain art, and it would be appreciated. Secondly, also speaks about the fact that here is the empire and is investing in this distant land, the amount of effort that's going into that.
So does Nagar still stand?
I mean, the rampart wall is there. There's a fort which is a later day construction from the Afghan period. And there's a mosque, one single mosque there, which is this one, the Mosque of Mullah Shah. This again is a mosque that most people associate with Dara Shikoh, the rather unfortunate son and heir apparent of Shah Jahan. But actually it was commissioned by his sister, the elder sister Dara Shikoh, Jahanara Begum. So this is a mosque that was commissioned by Jahanara for Akhund Mullah Shah Badakhshi. Badakhshi happened to be the disciple, the chief disciple of Miami, the one who laid the foundation of Golden Temple.
And so this city was set up, you're saying, by during Akbar's time?
During Akbar's time. And then it was sort of added upon by Shah Jahan, Jahangir, every sort of emperor added to it, till the time of Aurangzeb, and Aurangzeb only visited Kashmir once. And after that, you saw the decline of the Mughal Empire, and there's no longer this yearly imperial procession from Delhi or Agra to Lahore and then to Kashmir. So then Kashmir sort of becomes a sort of forgotten province, a Suba, which is there, which was once the most sought after Suba of the Mughal Empire. It was their paradise, but then remains a forgotten paradise.
So do we have maps of this this area? Is it comparable to Fatehpur Sikri, what was done there?
I mean, you have a sort of a Google map for the city, but you don't have a map which would be giving you an indication of how the city was, because there's nothing left. There's just one monument, which is this mosque. You don't even have archaeological traces of the rest of the structures. There are vivid accounts which come across in the Mughal official histories. There are verses, there are entire Masnavis that speak about some of the palaces that were located in this city. We also have some references even in Jahangir's Tuzk Jahangiri. He mentions about some of the palaces that were located in this city, if I would say so. But nothing survives. So we just have textual information and this single monument and the sort of the gateways and the rampant wall. That's it.
So this is a PhD topic for somebody.
Why not? So these are some of the older buildings that we have in Kashmir, the oldest mosques that we have in Kashmir from the Sultanate period. And what's interesting is that, again, they give you the date of the construction, they give you in certain cases, they give the name of the patron who was responsible for financing or constructing these buildings, but they also are invariably inscribed with a hadith or a verse of Quran. And in most cases, in all the documented cases that we have in Srinagar and Kashmir, the verse generally appeals to your sense of piety. So there is this sort of a hadith wherein the Prophet is reported to have said that those who build the mosque will be rewarded with a house in the heavens. So again, if you compare it with similar early epigraphy that you find in the Delhi Sultanate, there is this change. There's a change in terms of the context, there's a change in terms of the textuality of what's being sort of proclaimed to the audience. Here it's more of an appeal to a sense of piety and nothing more than that.
So, your history of Srinagar goes back essentially to, it seems to be from the 14th century onwards that we are looking at all these things.
I didn't get it.
In terms of architecture, in terms of what is left over.
You have earlier traces also in terms of buildings. You have buildings. You have a temple which is located within the Badami Bagh cantonment, which could be somewhere dated around the 11th century. You have remnants of temples across in the city. You have the Harun Buddhist monastery, which now is a part of the city, though historically it would be the outskirts. So you have the megaliths, which are at Burzoma, again traditionally city outskirts, but now a part of the city, the largest city in the city. So you have traces of settlement which predate the arrival of Muslims in the land. But what we were concerned was basically in tracing out texts on buildings, and that you only find surviving from the 14th century onwards. You don't have anything preceding that. And this is not a project that was limited to Srinagar. It was across the length of Kashmir that we surveyed buildings. Because again, even we also had an idea that there won't be much that survived. So in all, we did study, I think around 600 sites up and down the Jhelum River, but the traces, and somewhere it's just a single small stone, maybe 1 feet by 1 feet, were found only in around 41 sites. Some were extensively documented, like the Khanka Molla, because of the fact that you have such huge amount of material there. In certain cases, you just have a stone which gives the date of the foundation, or maybe some prayer there and there. So the scale varies, but it's spread across Kashmir.
And how long did it take you to do this?
I mean, it was 1 year. It was a 1 year project.
In 1 year, you looked at 600 sites?
I mean, you could also say that the team, the entirety of the team, are natives to Kashmir, so they've worked there for all their life, including me. So you have a certain idea of areas wherein you're going to find something more. But then there's also one of my colleagues on the project, Mehran, he did the translation. Most of the translations are done. All of the translations are basically done by him. Then there's another colleague, Umar, he actually went from site to site, searching, looking, and then you have to trace out the material. See, there is a material, there's an inscription. That inscription is in a certain language, that again is in a certain calligraphical style. And then you also have to do, which is not sort of put up here, you do also condition assessment. I mean, what is the state of the preservation of these these epigraphs, because that's what we are concerned about. What should be, how can we preserve them? So he was there. There was another colleague, Umar, Taha, who actually did the drawings. So there are many stones which, I mean, if you take out a picture, you won't be able to read anything like you are there. So we actually made drawings of it. So we traced out the outlines of the words so that we could get a sense of what's written there. And far more importantly, people, when they see, they can actually make out what's happened there, what's written there. So that was rather interesting. And then I should also like to mention the youngest member of the team was Tabish. So he's recently gone for his, I think, MFA at Goldsmith. So he had just completed his bachelor's. And he took all these amazing images, and I don't know how he managed it, because some of these images are located at the top of a building 28 feet high or 30 feet high, and we never had the drones to do it. So maybe climbed another building, went to the rooftop, took a picture with a certain amount of risk involved, his own could be, but he managed it. And it was nice work that way. So what I'm trying to say, this is not only a project which speaks about 1 year in terms of the research that's done on the ground. It's also about the work that all of us have been doing in Kashmir for so many years. It builds on that knowledge to a large extent, I would say.
And the reason I'm asking now is because we get into some of the most amazing photographs that there are in this, and I would love to see the real buildings.
So yeah, this is a project that I did for entire Kashmir. So this is one of the prominent and most revered shrines in Srinagar city is known as the Sir Sahib. So it belongs to the Qadariya Sufi Silsila. It's a sort of a symbol of a shrine, a mosque, khanqa. And the whole structure was burned down in 2012. So I don't exactly remember the date, but somewhere around 12th or something. And on 28th, we were allowed to go to this site and we had our first visual examination of the building. Then we were asked by the state government to sort of reconstruct it. Luckily and intact, we had already done documentation for some 20 or 25 buildings. So these are primarily wooden structures. The major ones that we had documented, and the reason was that Kashmir had already lost a good amount of its myth heritage because these are vulnerable to fire. They are in wood, they are vulnerable to fire. And we thought, okay, at least let's document it. One, for the sake of documentation itself, that at least you have a record. One which we never wished for, which was a case like this wherein you can use the same material to rebuild it. So in the end, it was a 6-year project, although there are some details that are still pending. It's always happened that funds run out, money runs out, and the project is left where it is. But here we were able to sort of reconstruct the entire site. And again, as I said, there's many components to the site. And I would like to especially mention my colleague on the project, Sumaira Haqqaq. She was the main person who was responsible for much of the work that happened there. And I would say, at the end of it, they did a sort of inauguration somewhere in 2018. And there were these couple of young teenagers, maybe around 20 or around, who were visiting the site. And I was also there waiting for the official opening, and they came to the site and they said in Kashmiri, "Yumo kya shukar mu?" Your shuti, which translates roughly into what have these guys done? It looks similar as it was, and I thought, okay, that's a backhanded compliment. This is what we're supposed to do. We are successful if you are saying. But I didn't say anything. But I do remember the sort of the Sajada machine, the person who was in charge of this whole shrine complex, he came and he said that normally when you go to a new shrine, for the first time you feel a bit lost. It's like you're in the awe of the physical space. But here, I know I used to come from this door. I would stop at this window. I'd offer my first Fatiha, which is a prayer at this door, and then I would sit there. It's all the same. So I thought that was also nice of him to say.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Sameer. Are we done or are we continuing?
That.
Thank you.